Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing nonprofit, educational, or personal use, tips the balance in favor of fair use. Okay, this again is from Understanding Scientology book by Margery Wakefield, Chapter 14. Brainwashing and Thought Control in Scientology. The Road to Rondroid. The techniques used in modern brainwashing are not like the medieval torture of the rack and the thumbscrew. They are subtler, more prolonged, and intended to be more terrible in their effect. They are calculated to disintegrate the mind of an intelligent victim, to distort his sense of values to a point where he will not simply cry out, "I did it," but will become a seemingly willing accomplice to the complete disintegration of his integrity and the production of an elaborate fiction. Dr. Carla W. Mayo, The Rape of the Mind. In part, the totalitarian state is sustained because individuals terrorize themselves. They become accomplices in their own tyrannization, censoring what they say and even what they allow themselves to think and feel. That's the worst. Willa Apple, Cults in America. The effectiveness of a doctrine does not come from its meaning but from its certitude. Crude absurdities, trivial nonsense, and sublime truths are equally potent in readying people for self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice. If they are accepted as the sole, eternal truth. It is obvious, therefore, that in order to be effective, a doctrine must not be understood, but has to be believed in. Eric Hoffer, The True Believer. Most people think that brainwashing is something that only happens in communist countries like Russia or North Korea. There is some validity to this belief because brainwashing was developed in these countries where it was used for psycho-political purposes. Brainwashing is defined as the process of causing a person to undergo a radical alteration of beliefs and attitudes. The brainwashed person is conditioned by punishment for undesirable beliefs and rewarded for expressing desirable beliefs. Kind of like the last 5 years, you guys? See a pattern? But what do I know, you guys? What do I know? I guess the genocide agendas are not true, right? Ex-cult members and their families are only too aware of the truth that brainwashing does exist in America. An uncomfortable reality has at last come home to the American public. Brainwashing, which once seemed exclusively a communist technique, is here in America and used by cults. Hundreds of former cult members testify this is so in court proceedings, public information hearings concerning the cults, magazine and newspaper interviews, and counseling sessions. Psychiatrists and other professionals who counsel former cultists confirm this. These techniques include constant repetition of doctrine, application of intense peer pressure, manipulation of diet so that critical faculties are adversely affected, deprivation of sleep, lack of privacy, and time for reflection. Sounds like the military. Complete break with past life, reduction of outside stimulation and influences, the skillful use of ritual to heighten mystical experience, and the invention of new vocabulary, and the manipulation of language to narrow down the range of experience and construct a new reality. Ronald Enroth describes what he calls the seduction syndrome. Many of those inducted into a cult like Scientology come in searching for identity or for spiritual reality, and this is especially true of young people. Coming to grips with one's identity has always been a part of adolescence in America, but today's youth face difficulties compounded by the massive cultural and social upheavals that characterize the contemporary world, especially during the last decade. Despite the boom in entertainment and the pervasive impact of the mass media, youth often remain bored, unfulfilled, and lonely. The tendency to drift in and out of a job, college, and sexual relationships, uncertainty and anxiety regarding the future, discontent with economic and political structures, all contribute to isolation and loneliness. Most cult members had previous experience in a traditional church or synagogue. However, cult seekers have found these conventional religious institutions to be lacking in spiritual depth and meaning, incapable of inspiring commitment and providing clear-cut answers, and often hypocritical in everyday life. In contrast, the cults provide black and white answers to the questions of life. Cults not only provide firm answers to every question, but also make promises that appeal to those needing reassurance, confidence, and affirmation. Many people come into a cult, such as Scientology, at a time in their life when they are undergoing unusual stress or crisis. The vulnerability. It's always like that. An example of this is a first-year college student, away from home for the first time. Others precipitating life experiences that increase vulnerability include such things as a recent divorce of one's parents or similar serious problem in the home, the extended critical illness of a family member, a breakup with a girlfriend or boyfriend, poor academic performance or failure, or unpleasant experiences with drugs or sex. When someone is feeling exceedingly anxious, uncertain, hurt, lonely, unloved, confused, or guilty, that person is a prime prospect for those who come in the guise of religion, offering a way out or peace of mind. Like church? And there are a small minority of people who are drawn to the cult because of chronic emotional problems, often as a result of growing up in a dysfunctional home. The lonely, the unstable, the vulnerable cult recruiters seem to have the ability to spot these people in a crowd. I just want to add in here too, it's typical predator behavior. Not that everybody in a cult or a church, I don't mean like that all churches are cults. Not that everyone that spots vulnerable people are predators, but I just want to make the comparison, and we've heard this over and over from pedophiles who come forward and explain how they find their victims. They look for very vulnerable children or teenagers. Actually, as far as that goes, same with criminals. It's like, it reminds me of like in the wild or in nature, how like if you see an injured animal like a deer or something, that will get eaten by the tiger faster because it's kind of unfortunate for that deer, but that deer can't run anymore. You know what I mean? They seem to have the ability to spot these people in a crowd. They seem to have a sixth sense for people who will make prime candidates for the cult. Recruitment of the vulnerable is one element of Enroth's seduction syndrome. Other elements include intense group pressure and group activities such as that experienced by the newcomer or the introductory course. That's the bait. The communication course of Scientology. Sensory deprivation, a lack of proper nutrition and adequate sleep, also experienced by Scientologists, who may be fed a diet of rice and beans, where have we heard that before, as a punishment for inadequate production, and a dramatic change in worldview, the adopting of beliefs radically different from those held before. So that's the point, isn't it? Just like everything that happened in 2020. That's all I'm going to say. You guys should be able to research it. If you know, you know. In another paradigm of brainwashing, Willa Apple describes a three-stage conversion process, which is also applicable to the Scientologist. In the first stage of the conversation, the recruit is isolated from his past life. I always love that isolation. First, the individual is isolated from his past life, cut off from his former position and occupation, as well as those with whom he has emotional ties. I just want to add in here, too, I remember hearing numerous stories, and this is, to me, so sad. I've heard numerous stories of young adults who were interested in Scientology, and they were business owners, and they sold off their business, gave all the money to Scientology, moved away from their homes, sold all their stuff, and then went into the Blue Building or maybe Clearwater. That is so sad to me. And that's how they like it. In Scientology, this is accomplished in several ways. In gradually adopting a new language, the recruit to Scientology is subtly separated from those in his past who no longer speak his language. And the use of the term WOG, a derogatory term to refer to all those outside. That's a racist statement. Did we forget about that? Refer to all those outside Scientology accomplishes the same end. Additionally, the student is pressured to spend every available minute on course like a child, instead of on frivolous pursuits outside Scientology, which are termed off-purpose, like going to college, like children that are not allowed to go to public or private schools where they can learn about other subjects like physics, science, geology, history, language arts, English, algebra, calculus. Off purpose is just dumbing people down. Facts. In the second phase of conversion, the loss of name and identity is reinforced. I'm sorry I keep interrupting, but do you guys know in the Marines that they don't even allow them to speak their name? When you go into the Marines, you're just Marine. Whereas if you're in the Army like I was, they refer to you by your last name. So all of a sudden you just completely lose your first name identity. It's just gone. And it also reminds me of in Scientology, they call the girls and the women sir, as if women don't exist. I guess women and little girls do exist for raping, though. That's for sure. We already know that. The loss of name and identity is reinforced by inducing the novice, emotionally and intellectually, to surrender his past life. Also, too, they cut people's hair in the military. It just reminded me. Humiliation and guilt are the basic tools in the psychological dismembering of the former self. Yeah, that what they do is they're taking away all your previous identities that you had, that you related to. So they're going to, how do I say it? Like they destruct you, and then they're going to rebuild you into what they want you to be. Like super soldier programs. I'm not an expert in all that, but there's various MK Ultra programs like that too. Delta, which stands for death. In Scientology, this phase is accomplished in two ways. First, though, the practice of auditing, more like interrogation, also called the confessional, in which the Scientologist, like a child, over a period of time divulges all the secrets of his entire lifetime. And second, through the ethics process of writing up one's OWs, overts and withholds, in which the person records every wrong deed, real or imagined, committed in this and in previous lifetimes. The Scientologist must produce these OWs until the ethics officer is satisfied that he is reduced to an acceptable level of contrition and humiliation. including putting children in closets for days to write up their OWs. It's an MF fact. It's an MF fact. All against the laws. I guess locking children up in closets for a few days, making them write down their overts and withholds, is all in the name of religious freedom. Ha, Scientology. In the third phase of Apple's conversion, the convert assumes a new identity and a new worldview. Like 2020, you guys? You had the antis and the so-sos, and the V's and the antis? Because Uncle Sam told you so, right? Wakey wakey. In Scientology, this is accomplished through a rigorous process of indoctrination through written and tape-recorded materials. The members' confidence in all previously trusted social institutions is ended and replaced with the belief that salvation can come only through Scientology. If this sounds familiar, you guys, there's a reason. The person's new sense of identity comes from his or her belonging to the cult, as all other allegiances are severed. A third paradigm of mind control, or brainwashing, comes from George Estabrooks in his writing about hypnotism, about which he was an expert. Estabrooks noticed that many of the elements of mob psychology, that's groupthink as well, for anyone who doesn't know, used by cult leaders were very similar to techniques used by hypnotists. That's why I was thinking the e-meters, like putting people in altered states, it's hypnotizing them somehow. It's changing their neural pathways. He states that these techniques were used by Hitler. They were also practiced by Hubbard. Must be a coincidence. Must be a coincidence that Hitler allegedly was into dark occultism, and so was Hubbard. Just one big effing coincidence. Of these 6 essential points in the psychology of the mob, the first is the cult leader will strive for a restriction of the field of consciousness. Dumbing down. Among the members of his mob cult, his ideas are only to be considered by the mob cult. His followers hear only one line of thought. His line of thought. Like in 2020, lose your job or don't get the J and lose your job? This will sound very familiar to a Scientologist. Scientologists are strictly forbidden against mixing practices. From studying any other system of thought, while in Scientology, Hubbard as source is regarded as ultimate authority and as infallible. Big fat slob is what he was. Any confusion or disagreement with anything said or written by Hubbard is regarded as a misunderstanding or misunderstood word on the part of the student, like a child. That's thought stopping. Anyone listening to this, whether you're a Scientologist, Jehovah's Witness, if you're in a church, wherever you're at, this is what they're doing to stop your thoughts. You can't ask questions. Just like they call everyone who asks a question, they call them a squirrel, they call them PTS, they call them suppressive. That's all to stop you from questioning anything. The second point in mob psychology is that the dictator will appeal to the emotions. Moreover, he will appeal to the baser emotions of fear, anger, hatred. On purpose, you guys. In Scientology, there is an appeal to fear and to guilt. What do I talk about with fear, obligation, and guilt? In narcissism. And at the very top of the pyramid, the very super elite, how do they get things done? They make people terrified. Like in 2020, and it worked, didn't it? Everybody gave up their rights, just like a bunch of The ideology in Scientology is that we are caught in a trap, and that Scientology is the only way out of the trap. Fear is also maintained within the group by the Office of Ethics, through which any doubts, disagreements, or failures within the group are punished. Members having serious disagreements or difficulties are threatened with expulsion and the label of suppress a person or eternal condemnation. Third, the mob cult leader will count on emotional contagion, an extremely important factor in all mob cult situations. Emotions are far more contagious than the measles. Humans tend to fit into the emotional pattern of a group. Groupthink. In Scientology, the prevailing emotion is a sense of urgency, like since 20 and 20, and of fear. Scientologists at work do not walk, they run, like children. Everything is deadly serious and urgent. The world is at stake. Each small victory has added significance. Scientology is a group at war, and this mentality leads fervor, enthusiasm, and a sense of danger to each activity. It's also going to wreak havoc on your nervous system. It's going to send you into being hypervigilant at all times. Fourth, we have the matter of social sanction. The individual feels justified in any action approved by the mob, cult, and its leaders. Because Scientologists believe themselves to be fighting for the salvation of mankind, any acts, even if they are illegal, which will contribute to this purpose, are sanctioned by reason of the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics. That's groupthink. The fifth element of mob psychology has to do with omnipotence. The I'm right, you're wrong reaction. Sound like a narcissist? Which we see in the fanatic. It never occurred to the not see. It does not occur to the communist that there are two sides to an argument. Well, that's the point, isn't it? Scientology to the Scientologist is the only truth. The fact has caused enormous frustration for many family members trying to reason with the Scientologist in their family. The mind of the Scientologist is closed to any other possibility than Scientology. There is no other side to the argument. Finally, there is the removal of inhibitions. Anything goes if the party sanctions such activity. Jonestown was a shocking example of this aspect of the cult mentality. Scientology is another potential Jonestown, except on a much wider scale. You know, a lot of people have said that. A lot of people. Robert Lifton identifies 8 features, common to all forms, of what he calls ideological totalism. 8 psychological themes common to an environment in which brainwashing is present: milieu control, mystical manipulation, the demand of purity, the cult of confession, the sacred science, loading the language, doctrine over person, and the dispensing of existence. Each of these features can be found in Scientology. In milieu control, the cult controls both the environment and the communication of the cult member. Like a child, of course. Scientology is a very controlled environment. The existence of the Department of Ethics provides the threat of punishment for all transgressions against cult norms. Isn't this against the law to create governing systems that don't adhere to the United States government? Anybody with the policies and laws brain, you know, the regulations and that, I would appreciate it if you could, in the comments or email me, what law that states that organizations cannot create self-governing bodies, right? I'm going to start checking my email too, by the way. I'm sorry. Okay, guys. The existence of the Department of Ethics provides the threat of punishment for all transgressions against cult norms. Even physical illness is considered the shortcoming of the person and evidence of the existence of out ethics or degraded beings. Communication with those outside Scientology, WOGS, I refuse to say that. It's a racial slur in the UK. Is manipulated to achieve the desired ends of the cult. The cult members' communication with family members, especially ones not favorable to the cult. This is the thought stopping. This is the thought stopping. The disconnection. Especially ones not favorable to the cult. Is often dictated by the cult. Communication with the cult follows certain rules. Upper level students may not discuss the contents of these levels, even with a spouse. If it sounds like the Second World War in certain countries, you guys are right. And the fact that HIT, you know him, allegedly was following dark occultism, and L. Ron Hubbard was following dark occultism. Hello. All other Scientologists are forbidden to discuss their case or feelings with other Scientologists. Through the use of knowledge reports, members critical of the organization, like children, may be reported by other members, like children, as in a communist state. They're all using the same playbook, if you guys didn't figure that out. In mystical manipulation, the group seeks to inspire in the members certain behaviors and feelings that seem to have originated magically from the environment. In Scientology, the member comes to think and believe, just as Hubbard teaches, thinking that these thoughts and beliefs are the result of his own cognitions, or coming to truth. With the demand for purity, the experiential world is sharply divided into the pure and the impure, into the absolutely good and the absolutely evil. The good and pure are, of course, those ideas, feelings, and actions which are consistent with the totalist ideology and policy. Anything else is apt to be relegated to the bad and the impure. A good example of this in Scientology is the redefinition of the word ethics, which comes to mean that which is good for or benefits Scientology, while anyone against Scientology is an enemy or an SP, suppressive person. Again, the thought stopping, you guys. A good person is one who is most completely aligned with the goals and purposes of Scientology. An evil person is the one who opposes the greater good, or Scientology. You guys ever notice, too, the greater good always requires Scientologists to completely snuff out their individuality? It reminds me of a lot of these youth camps and certain schools and certain colleges. Just saying. The cult or confession is carried out in Scientology through the many levels of auditing or confessionals, and through the periodic writing up of one's OWs, overts and withholds. This purging oneself of both actual and imagined crimes leads to the gradual act of self-surrender to the group. One learns to think only those thoughts sanctioned and acceptable to the group. The totalist milieu maintains an aura of sacredness around its basic dogma, holding it out as an ultimate moral vision for the ordering of human existence. This is what Lifton calls sacred science. Scientology to a Scientologist is absolute truth, And there is a certain comfort in this belief. Having black and white answers to the complex questions of life shields one from the insecurity and uncertainty of ambiguity. And this is one of the great attractions of Scientology for its members. Hubbard, a persuasive and dynamic speaker, makes many claims about the scientific validity of his science, none of which have ever been subjected to the rigors of the scientific method, but which are accepted at face value by his trusting disciples. The language of the totalist environment is characterized by the thought-terminating cliché. It is the language of non-thought. We don't need no thought control. Scientologists have their own dictionary. A conversation between two Scientologists might not make sense to a non-Scientologist. Lifton states, the effect of the language of ideological totalism can be summed up in one word, constriction. He is, so to speak, linguistically deprived, and since language is so central to all human experience, his capacities for thinking and feeling are immensely narrowed. That's the point, you guys. An example of this kind of constriction of thought is the phrase in Scientology's, my 2D and I are in ARC, which can be translated as, the person I am romantically involved with, either as a lover or a spouse, and I have a great deal of love for each other. We share basically the same beliefs, we communicate well with each other, and there is a shared understanding between us, which is very positive. Other examples of loaded language are the words reality, ethics, and suppressive, the latter containing a world of meaning for a Scientologist. That's the blackmail words. Lifton also describes the primacy of doctrine over person. The demand that character and identity be reshaped, not in accordance with one's special nature or potentialities, but rather fit the rigid contours of the doctrinal mold. A Scientologist is never allowed to think about the tech or the science developed by Hubbard. You know, the one that he pulled out of his you-know-what. To alter the tech in any way is denounced as squirreling, for which crime one can be expelled from Scientology. Questioning the doctrine is forbidden. That's what I said. Doubts or questions are euphemistically relabeled as M-use, or misunderstood words, on the part of the student. The totalist environment draws a sharp line between those who right to existence, can be recognized, and those who possess no such right, known as non-people. In Scientology, there are two types of non-people, WOGs and SPs. WOGs are those who have yet to become enlightened as to Scientology. SPs, or suppressive persons, have no right to exist, and this is declared by Scientology's fair game law, which states that enemies of Scientology can be sued, tricked, lied to, or destroyed. This is the dispensing of existence within Scientology. One of the phenomena common to many cults is a personality change in the cult member after conversion. This has been a frightening experience for many families. Sometimes the change comes about gradually, and in other cases, it occurs in a single experience called snapping by one team of researchers. The cult personality is radically different from the pre-cult personality. I just want to add in here too, it does remind me of how in satanic ritual abuse, based on the various tortures and atrocities committed on babies, children, or adults, it it causes them to completely disassociate and create another alter personality. And it's just similar, is all I'm saying. It's not exactly the same, but there's some similarities. There is evidence that this change is organic as well as psychological. Exposing a person to a radical change in environment and an overload of new and radically different information may actually cause a change in the neurotransmitters in the brain. I just said that. Trying to figure out why never mind. The substances non-epinephrine and serotonin in the brain have similar chemical composition as mescaline or LSD. When sensory flow to the brain becomes either severely restricted or suddenly overloaded, it can trigger a state of increased suggestibility or the symptoms of dissociation or hallucinations. I was just thinking about the past few years. We're out of that craziness, but the more fearful they could make people, the more exhausted they could make people. Also, of course, there were a lot of threats, as you guys know. It caused people in certain ways to disassociate, not exactly the same as SRA abuse, but that's where they were inputting suggestibility. You guys should understand. Okay. When sensory flow to the brain becomes either severely restricted or suddenly overloaded, like the last 5 years, it can trigger a state of increased suggestibility or the symptoms of dissociation or hallucinations. In Scientology, this can occur in the hypnotic trance or TR0. I've been saying it. I knew my gut was telling me this. Or during the long hours on the Scientology courses. Yeah, it makes sense. Psychiatrist Dr. John Clark of Harvard University believes that the cults, including Scientology, are psychologically dangerous. In cults, people are presented with stressful circumstances, especially huge loads of new information at times in their lives when they are vulnerable, and they disassociate. Like when they're terrified about something. Hint, hint. What the Scientologists and all the other dangerous cults do is maintain the disassociation. They keep the parts of the mind, the connections inside the central nervous system, divided in function, in action, and in their connection with the outer world. It's a way of controlling them, and the longer it goes on, the further apart all of this gets to be, like the chronic schizophrenic. Did Hubbard really believe in Scientology, or was he just a calculating con man? Well, his son has spoken on that. Just go check it out. Estabrooks describes what he calls a sincere dictator. The dictator generally is a man of great personal courage. He plays along grimly till the last throw of the dice and meets his fate with his chin up. This may be because he is perfectly sincere. This sounds like a strange contradiction, but we must accept it. The dictator really believes that he is God's chosen instrument. It's called delusion, you guys. Or society's chosen instrument, if he does not believe in God, to lead his group, or possibly the entire world, into the promised land. The resulting picture is not pleasant, and the individual who creates that picture is easily the most dangerous of all, the mentally maladjusted. I could say that again. He has intelligence, conviction, drive, courage, and will be utterly unscrupulous, a combination which calls for serious concern. Those who knew him will agree that this is a fair description of Hubbard. One important clue to the motivations of Hubbard lies in a book he wrote in the mid-1950s called Brainwashing Manual. I'm going to touch on that one day. Although there were witnesses that Hubbard wrote this book, he attributed authorship to the infamous Russian politician Beria, then pretended to discover it. One must ask themselves, why was Hubbard so obsessed with brainwashing? Did it just come out of the clear blue sky? Come on, you guys. Some of the passages from this book reveal much about Hubbard. It is not enough for the state, Scientology, to have goals. These goals, once put forward, depend for the completion upon the loyalty and obedience of the workers, Scientologists, like children. These engage, for the most part, in hard labors, have little time for idle speculation, which is good. Hypnosis is induced by acute fear. Belief is engendered by a certain amount of fear and terror from an authoritative level, and this will be followed by obedience. The body is less able to resist a stimulus if it has insufficient food and is weary. Refusal to let them sleep over many days. They do this also too in prisons. The torture of prisoners. Denying them adequate food then brings about an optimum state for the receipt of a stimulus to input their ideas. Like the last 5 years. Degradation and conquest are companions. By lowering the endurance of a person, and by constant degradation and defamation, it is possible to induce thus a state of shock which will receive adequately any command given. Any organization which has the spirit and courage to display inhumanity, savageness, brutality will be obeyed. Such a use of force is itself the essential ingredient of greatness. Who says that kind of stuff? And in rearranging loyalties, we must have command of their values. In the animal, the first loyalty is to himself. This is destroyed by demonstrating errors in him, like you're degraded. The second loyalty is to his family unit. Exactly. This is destroyed by lessening the value of marriage, by making an easiness of divorce, and by raising the children whenever possible by the state. Who do you guys think about this? Who do you think has the goal of raising your children? You guys noticing things going on right now? Come on now. Raising the children whenever by the state. The next loyalty is to his friends and local environment. This is destroyed by lowering his trust and bringing about reportings upon him, allegedly by his fellows or the town or village authorities. The next loyalty is to the state, Church of Scientology, and this for the purposes of communism. Scientology is the only loyalty which should exist. And finally, the tenets of rugged individualism, personal determinism, self-will, imagination, and personal creativeness are alike in the masses antipathetic to the good of the greater state, Scientology. These willful and unaligned are no more than illnesses, which will bring about disaffection, disunity, that's the point, and at length the collapse of the group to which the individual is attached. The constitution of man lends itself easily and thoroughly to certain and positive regulation from without of all of its functions, including those of thinkingness, obedience, and loyalty, and these things must be controlled if the greater state, Scientology, is to ensue. The end thoroughly justifies the means. Did Hubbard know what he was doing? The answer is yes. Driven by greed, by his twin lusts for money and power, he willfully and knowingly destroyed the lives of the thousands naive enough to follow him. This is a good book. I might have to get this one. So I will leave a link in the description box. Like and subscribe if you choose. Otherwise, have an amazing day or night wherever you are. Peace.